Henry, how you doing today?
I'm good, brother. It's hot. It's hot, but I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. It's another day, and just I feel good. I'm talking to you, man. When's the last time I get to see your face? So I'm talking. This is a good day. I get to see the John, the man, the pastor.
No, well, I appreciate you doing this. I really do. Um, to all the Heartlanders tuning in and joining us here today, I want to just say many of you, probably most all of you, know Henry and what Henry means to our community. But Henry is part of is a big part of our community. And Henry, you have played an important role over the years and continue to, and you've been a great friend to us at Heartland. I know you're doing incredible work with Madison 365 and Selfless Ambition, as well as other organizations and events and things, but really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. So thanks for being here.
And I hope I'm part of the Heartland family. Like I hope I'm at least a distant cousin, right? I'm at least somewhere in the family tree.
Absolutely you are. Absolutely you are. Yes, no doubt about that. Oh man. So for everybody, just as we begin our conversation, I want to go back kind of to the heart of really this call, and that is here probably 4 or 5 weeks ago now, following the death of George Floyd and some of the events that were happening in our country. I made the decision at Heartland that we were going to push pause on our regularly scheduled, or that's kind of a TV term, I guess, right? Our regularly scheduled program. I made the decision to push pause on the teaching that we were planning to do so that I could talk a little bit about what was happening in our country as it related to race relations. And I think we even called the teaching that. We said the teaching was just called "We're Gonna Talk About It." And as part of that teaching, I made the point that we, especially those of us who are white and to a predominantly white church, we needed to do an intentional job. We needed to be intentional in listening to and learning from our brothers and sisters of color who have had a different experience than we have had. And as part of that, I said, we do not want this to be a one-time conversation. We want to engage in this conversation repeatedly, and we want to continue to learn and grow and continue to talk about these things that are so important in our world today and even in our community here at home. And so this is sort of a logical next step in that, to say, let's continue the conversation. And so over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had Heartlanders have been invited to send in questions, knowing that I was going to be talking to you, knowing that I was going to be interviewing you. Of course, you do not represent, the whole world. You do not represent every person of color. We're not asking you to. We're not asking you to speak on behalf of all Black men or anything like that. But we're just asking you to represent yourself and to share your experience and your perspective with us as we continue to engage in a conversation where we have so much to learn. So does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, it sounds great. And let me commend you, John, for having that conversation. It wasn't easy for you to have that conversation. Race is never a easy issue to talk about for any person. So for you being the pastor of that church to get up there and talk about that, and that's such a vulnerable state and such an emotional time, I give you kudos for that, man. And I think the church should applaud you for having the courage to talk about something like that. So I
Well,
appreciate
thank you.
you.
No, I certainly, it was the least I could do. So let me begin here, Henry, by saying you are born and raised in Dane County, right?
Yeah, well, I was born in Gary, Indiana.
Oh, okay. All right.
So people don't know that, right? So I was born in Gary, Indiana, but I was only here for 2 weeks, John, maybe like 7 days at the most. I was born, my dad came here to law school, and so I've been here ever since. So yeah, this is home.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. So for me and probably a lot of our viewers today, a lot of people who live here now are not from here. And so we do not have a whole lot of context for what happens in our community today compared to 20 years ago, for example. So as we begin, why don't you just take a moment to talk about your experience as it relates to race relations here in Dane County over the last couple decades?
Yeah, that's a question, an interesting question for me because I've been black my whole life, right? So, so all my experiences sadly have been dealing with race, good and bad. So I think I always used to joke when I was at Heartland that Sun Prairie was a place that black folks didn't go because it was primarily white and culturally white, and we weren't really welcome there. And that was true. So that has changed over the time where Sun Prairie now has, percentage-wise, a lot more blacks than Madison does. So that just gives you a snapshot about how much Madison and Dane County has changed. That when I grew up, it was more primarily white, and there were certain places we knew we couldn't go, and that was just facts that we knew that. Or if we did go, like at the Corn Fest, they used to have a Corn Fest somewhere. They still have that there, Corn Fest.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a big deal.
Okay, so the Corn Fest, and so we used to know if we went to the Corn Fest, there had to be 20 of us to go out there, just because we knew that if something happened, we'd have to have a big group of us to protect ourselves. And so, those are the type of things growing up that you had to do being black in Dane County, of always being always on your surroundings and always being, never trying to go, like if you're going out, always go with someone else. And those are the type of things you learn, those little things that you learn how to protect yourself. So I mean, I think that growing up was the biggest thing of how things have changed. Where now, people can go out and be by themselves. Just there's just more people of color around. I think that's changed, and obviously, professionally, I've done a lot of different things, from starting a Black Chamber of Commerce and worked at the Chamber of Commerce, first Black person to run for Lieutenant Governor in the state of Wisconsin. So I've done things where I've been the first, but I always say the first in the door, first to get shot. So, I think that Madison has changed a lot as far as the numbers and the perception. I think when you start getting to the core, though, of the issues for race, education achievement gaps, infant mortality rate for black women and for kids, incarceration rates, things like that, that has not changed and that has not improved. And so those are the things that are concerning and alarming, that those things have been going on for a long time, and have not changed. But from a perspective of having black and brown people more visible, more around, more populated, that has changed drastically. Even looking at the schools, that's changed. But actually, when it comes to an infrastructure, a system process, not much has changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as I have even, I've been in Sun Prairie for the last 13 years, right? So over the last 13 years, I've started to see that. I've started to learn about the disparity or some of the achievement gaps when it comes to our students and things. And as it relates to what I do and at church, occasionally I will hear from somebody who is of the opinion that Heartland or churches in general should focus on sharing the gospel story of Jesus, the forgiveness of sins story, right? And should not take the weekend or the pulpit to talk about things like race relations or the achievement gap, things like that on a Sunday morning, right? They would say, John, you've got 6 other days to pour your life into that if you want to, but on Sunday morning you should stick to, a chapter and verse out of the Bible. For you, I know that your faith is a huge part of your life. You're a follower of Jesus, right? It's not like I'm talking to a non-believer here. Like, you're Christian.
Love Jesus. Jesus is my why. Everything I do is because of Jesus. He is my why, my rock. Everything I do is because of Jesus.
I love that. And that's part of what I love about you. And that's part of why I love talking to you. But how does that land with you when you hear that as both a believer and yet also someone who has lived that for the last several decades? What do you think about that?
if you're, the rapper Jay-Z.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So Jay-Z, I was
Hey,
listening.
I'm white, but I mean, I'm not that white. I don't know who Jay-Z is. I mean, come on. Okay, I admit I like country music, but you know,
Yeah, I know Jay-Z.
who Jay-Z is.
All right, so Jay-Z says in one of his lines that he goes, Jesus can't save you. He said, where church in life begins.
Mm.
So what he is saying in that lyric is saying that he's given up on the church.
Mm.
And he's also saying that after Sunday, go to church service on Sunday, life begins. So he's one of the most prominent rappers who dictates culture across the board. And that was his Empire State of Mind, I think, or I think I forgot the name of the song, but one of his biggest songs, one of his biggest hits, that's a lyric he says in his song that tells you the danger of the church not talking about things outside of Sunday and outside the church walls. And it's a big part of the reason why the church is declining, because younger people are people who are living in life don't see the relevancy of the church speaking to things that actually impact their daily day life. And so I don't know how any pastor, any church can actually get up and talk about Jesus, because Jesus came to give life. He was speaking about how to change our daily lives, how to breathe life into us, how to be fruitful, and to speak for the most vulnerable. How can you as a Christian or a pastor not get up and talk about what's going on for everyone's life, and talking about the relevance of scripture and the word and how it's actually relevant to your day-to-day life? Forget the race issue, just in general, how can you not talk about that, right? So it's like, I think that's a real issue. And I think, I don't know, this is the problem with the church. And I love the church. I love the bride. But if you don't talk about these things, what's your relevancy?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense to me. I totally agree. And, I'm not familiar necessarily with that lyric from Jay-Z, but that makes total sense, is that, our faith should be so intertwined with life, quote unquote, in the real world, or life outside the walls of the church. They are not separate. They overlap and intertwine, and all of life is life. And so, yeah, that's great. I totally agree with that.
unless you get up on the culture, right? Unless you're saying that the only thing for people is just on Sunday at church, and then everything else in the rest of the week is for, that you just don't believe that those days are relevant to what God is trying to do. And I believe Jesus is every day. He doesn't rest.
Yep. No, and I believe that God calls the church, the Big C church, to the world's biggest problems. He calls us to shine a light and to be his hands and feet and mouthpiece to a hurting, broken world, and to help expand his kingdom into our community. And that's what we're committed to doing, and we're going to keep doing it. So, yeah, no.
And I agree with you. And that's what you just said is important, though, right? It's his work, it's his kingdom. So this is where people, this is tough. But here's the tough part: we have to carry the cross, right? Part of carrying the cross is you have to die. Part of your biases, your issues, your perspective have to go away. Like, that means your pain, all that stuff has to go away. You have to put Jesus first. And if you put in Jesus first, Jesus wants to help the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. He wants to help the people. He came to help the sick. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If he came to help the people, the sick, he's gonna have to talk about issues that are relevant to them and reach them where they are. Yeah. It's just, there's no other way around it. If it's about you and your biases, that's one thing. If it's about the kingdom of Jesus, that's an easy. You have to go out. You are commanded. You are mandated to go and love your neighbor. You are mandated to help the sick. You are mandated to go out and help people who don't look like you. You are mandated to help the Gentiles. You are mandated to do this. You have no other choice if you're a true follower of Christ. So this is like it's elementary, right? Again, you have to put yourself down. You have to put your biases down. You have to learn how to forgive. You have to judge people how God would judge. Like, you have to look at them as God's children, and you have to help the most vulnerable. If you could tell me some other scripture that argue with what I'm telling you, great. I mean, like, then let's have that conversation. Like, but until you can show me that that's not what Jesus said, then I don't even know what. Yes, you should be on Sundays talking about the word and how it's impacted people's lives.
Yeah. No, that's great. All right, so I'm gonna read you this question, okay?
Sure.
Within the Black community, there is overwhelming agreement that there is currently a race problem in the United States, but there are outliers. African-American men and women who we see on TV or we see online who claim there is no real discrimination at all, like system-wide, or that Black men and women all have the same opportunities as white people. And they claim that other Black individuals are using race as an excuse for their lack of achievement or for their problems. How are we supposed to balance the conflicting opinions that sometimes feel like they're coming from within the Black community?
So this is a good question. And whoever asked that question, I appreciate that, because that's a really not a politically correct question. And so I actually appreciate that question, because those are the type of questions that deal with the heart. Like, if we only have a politically correct questions, we're not going to get the heart of the real issue, right? So that it's a moot point. So this is what I would say to that question, though. And I always say it's to love to that person who said that there's always going to be, like they said, outliers, a few people who are going to have a different perspective than the majority of the people of color. And the Black community is not a monolithic. There's people in the Black community who think differently. You had people like Malcolm X who thought one thing, and people like Martin Luther King thought a different thing, and people like Thurgood Marshall. So there's always been spectrums. W. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington. It's always been a spectrum of how Black people have thought. But even in that spectrum, majority of people have felt that there has been racism, discrimination against Black people. Malcolm X might have had a different perspective how he wanted to deal with the issue. Martin had a perspective how he wanted to deal with the issue. But they still agreed that there was racism and that there's systematic racism. Now, some people might not want to believe that, but there's no way you can get around the data of how many Black people are incarcerated. If you look at laws, how laws have strategically tried to break up Black families, gentrification. I mean, you could go on and on and on and show policies since slavery have been intentional to attack the Black family, the Black infrastructure. So I think the people, those outliers who say that, you can never, I don't want to ever dismiss someone's experience. So those people who will say that, well, I'm going to trust that they're coming from an honest place and not just a political trying to, be opportunists, but they're from maybe that's their experience. I'm sure that a lot of some Black people who haven't experienced racism and who've had, just haven't experienced that. But majority of Black folks have on some level experienced racism and have dealt with racism in society. And so I would tell you that just do your own research, and don't go to places that you want to go to who are telling you what you want to hear, but just take a step back and look at the spectrum and the breadth of Black folks who don't even agree with each other, who would actually agree that there is systematic racism, and that goes from incarceration rates to everything. And it's actually playing out to COVID-19, right? Look at COVID-19. Black people are dying at a higher rate than everyone else because of all the health disparities, and that becomes from a system that has not done well with the Black community, from health to environment to all these things that all plays into it. So I understand why someone would ask that question, and again, not to dismiss those people, those outliers, but I would say they are outliers. I say the majority of people who are Black or people of color have experienced racism in the community, and they disagree. They have different like I'm telling. There's people agree that there's racism. Now that's the different conversation. There's people who agree that there's racism, but they disagree on the tactics of how to get in it, to address those things, and you can see some of that playing out.
Yeah, for sure. Henry, there's been some confusion for people around the hashtag Black Lives Matter and the statement Black Lives Matter and the organization which is named Black Lives Matter. Are these one and the same, or is it possible to support the hashtag without supporting the organization?
Yeah, so I think the Black Lives Matter is just talking symbolically about Black Lives Matter. When I talk about it, I don't associate with the Black Lives Matter organization. And actually, if you look at it, there's some people who support Black Lives Matters, like the symbolic, the name, who might not support the organization, the Black Lives Matter. They might have a ideology difference, right? So I think, yes, I think there's not necessarily you have to support one versus the other. But I do think there's a lot of people who support Black Lives Matters without actually supporting the group Black Lives Matters. I think it's a different thing. And the Black Lives Matter group was really, it's the organization that was started is broader than just Black folks too. I mean, I think it was started by 2 transgender women. So it's a broader spectrum of gender, sexuality. So they have a broader spectrum of what they're talking about. So they're not just talking about Black lives, they have a broader agenda too. So that's also part of it.
Okay. Yeah. And that's even for me, you know, when in the teaching that a few weeks back, it's over a month ago now, I guess, we're going to talk about it. In that teaching, I encouraged Heartlanders to say Black Lives Matter and to use the hashtag, to support the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and, you know, retweet it if you're on Twitter or whatever it may be, but to come around that and to support it. And even at the time, or since then, I guess, some people have reached out and they have asked me that. They said, John, when you said we should say and be willing to say Black Lives Matter, were you trying to push a political agenda or an organization's platform? And I've had to clarify and say, no, I was not trying to support this organization. I was not trying to push an organization's, you know, political agenda. I was simply trying to encourage our church to recognize that Black lives matter as much as anybody else's, and we should be, you know, ready and willing to say that and support that and use that and come around that and behind that. So I'm glad to hear you say that. All right, here's another question. So many people have said that they are okay with people of color peacefully protesting injustice, right? They're okay. I'm okay with you peacefully protesting injustice, but they start tuning them out when they start looting and rioting. So how should people think about the looting? What should people's perspective be on that component of this whole big social unrest that we're observing right now?
So this is a really big debate right now, even within the Black community, some Black leaders. And I do a show called Real Talk, and I've talked to both sides of the factions of this way of thinking. But I would tell you, from a man of faith and a man of God, I believe that Martin Luther King, I keep coming back to him, but Martin Luther King was all about confrontation, always about challenging systems, being confrontational, but always being nonviolent. And so I tend to fall in that lane of nonviolent, non-destructive, confrontational, confront the system, but always being loving. So I think, in my perspective, I think that the looting is one. It's people who have no hope, and they have no hope in the system, and they don't see the system benefiting them and helping them and talking to them, and they feel no value in what you value because they feel like you don't value them, and so they just, as victims of a system, they lash out how they're lashing out. Now, I think, to me, for lots of different reasons, I think that's not the right way to lash out from my perspective. I think that's not the right way to, one, just from a practical perspective, and we see this playing out now, John, is that for the most of the looting downtown in Madison was for white people, no question about it. There was some black kids and black folks doing it. But we see it playing out now. The people the youth who are actually looting now are getting arrested and getting up to potentially 23 years in jail for some of the stuff they're doing. So from a practical perspective, it doesn't make sense that you would be going out and violating and breaking laws, like in looting and breaking in property, all that stuff, because you're only jeopardizing your own life. Those are things that you can get locked up and thrown away and put away, forgotten about. Your cause that you're fighting for, you lose. So from perspective, I'm really against it too. But I'm also for a perspective, I don't really believe that hate can drive out hate. I don't think that violence can drive out violence. And I don't think strategically that's the best strategic move to move forward by looting and rioting and all that stuff. Now, I do think confrontation is needed. But I get why some people would feel that's the only alternative they have, though, is to break things and to get the system's attention, because they feel like they've done everything else when they can't get their attention, which, says that a lot of our generations don't feel that there's hope. And if they have no hope, they're going to lash out, right? And what people don't talk about, a lot of black people don't own property. We don't own buildings. We don't own businesses. So if we don't own anything, we don't own the property, what do we have to lose to a system that's already going against us? This is why the system has to be there has to be some equality about how we do things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't remember where it was now. I would love to be able to credit the person who first said this, but I think it had been shared so many times that credit got lost. But I read something online that I thought was really powerful and kind of struck the nail on the head for me, and if I can find this, we'll put it up here. We'll come in after the fact and put this up so people can read it. But it said, when you say the killing of Black Americans is horrible, but the looting has got to stop, when you say that, you're putting the emphasis on the wrong thing. Instead, what you should say is the looting is horrible, but the killing of Black Americans has got to stop. And I thought that hit the nail on the head, because if there is both damage happening to people and property, our focus and our primary area of concern has got to be the people first, not the property first. So if we've got two problems to solve, if we've got two things being damaged here, people and property, it has got to be our top priority to solve the people component first, and we'll worry about the property second. But people come before property.
Well, and it goes to the core. Again, this comes to faith, right? So if you see as God's children, you see them as God's children. Forget what biases you have. If you see them as God's children, you want to love, you want to give them the grace and the space to make mistakes and to love them. And you're right. If you deal with the core of the heart of the people aspect, will take care of some of the hopelessness that people have and other things, right? So, Martin Luther King he said, it's not burn, baby, burn, it's build, baby, build. So, and I take that from him as saying you have to build in people, you have to build in the culture, you have to build in lives. And if you build that way, you won't have to worry about the burn, baby, burn, right? Because you're living and breathing life and treating people how all God's children should be treated.
Yeah, no, that's great. All right. Here, moving on. I know that sometimes the question of what should I do when a person like me with my pale complexion reaches out to someone like you and says, what should I do? I do know that question can be annoying. That can be frustrating, because the reality is, if I really wanted to do something, I'm smart enough that I can figure out what to do. I can do the research, I can read, I can pay attention, I can listen, I can learn, and I can figure out what to do. But I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here and ask you, from your perspective, what what should I be doing? What should people who are watching this do, in our community, in our context, with what's going on in our world today, in light of COVID and restrictions on that? Like, if you could say, hey, listen, to a majority white church that is filled with people who have fantastic hearts and genuinely want to live out their faith well and be part of the solution, what would you say to them?
First I would say, it's true, man. I get calls every hour and an hour from my white friends asking what can we do. So for Christians, this is gonna sound like a cliche, and I know it does. But the first thing I would tell you is pray. I believe in the power of prayer, and I think anytime you make moves or try to act on anything without prayer is a huge mistake. And so I would say prayer is big, and prayer gives guidance and wisdom and discernment. So I'd say first pray, as a Christian. Second, I would say uh, find out things that you're interested in. The mistake what I see a lot of white people doing right now is there's tend to go for the people who they see who are the loudest right now, and these are the people, for our white brothers and sisters who might not have a lot of black or brown friends, who you know are not well read and educated, and so they hear a certain black people speak up, and they think that is the way that all black people think, and so they attach themselves to that thinking, that ideology, and without doing their own research. So I think that's dangerous, I think, to me. So I would say, one, become more well read on issues of race, but not just on your perspective. Like, read about different perspectives in the black community, and there's so many different books, and people have different perceptions. So look at that. But two, find out what your interests are. So if your interests are kids, if it's economic development, if it's jobs, if it's whatever that is, whatever your passion is, find out the black organizations or organizations that are doing those things and start trying to support them. If it's financially, if it's just going down volunteering, find out the organizations that are helping those communities from that lens that you're comfortable in, that and try to really address those and get involved with them. And then third, I would say you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you have to be comfortable knowing that when you start getting in these issues, you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to be hurt, and you might feel guilty, and you might think you have to get past all that stuff and figure out how can you help serve and love other people the best way for them to be their whole authentic selves. So I would say you have to be ready to be uncomfortable, and then be ready to follow some people of color in doing the work that you're willing to do. And the key thing is saying, follow, not lead, not take it over, not try to dictate, but be willing to follow people who are actually doing this work, and be willing to listen first, speak second. And I think is key.
Yeah, that's great. And this won't be the end of the conversation for us. We're going to continue to have this conversation and dialogue about this stuff at Heartland. And there's definitely a lot to learn. There's a lot we can do. We're going to continue to try to figure out a path forward to be part of the solution in our community. So, well, Henry, thank you so much, man. I want to respect your time, and I know that you are a very busy man. I know Henry had to push back our call just a little bit here today because I said, well, why? And he said, because I'm talking to the governor. It's like, oh, okay. All right. Yeah, well, you can push our call back. You want to talk to the governor. So you are big time, man. So thanks for talking to me and to the Heartland crowd. Appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to address one thing before we go, though. So
please.
You said about Black Lives Matters, and the question that I want to address this because I hear this a lot especially from the church, about why it's even important for you to be saying Black Lives Matter, right? And so, if from a faith perspective, if I have lung cancer, I'm not going to be concerned about, I'm not going to be talking about colon cancer. I'm going to be talking about lung cancer. Doesn't mean that my colon is not important, right? Doesn't mean that doesn't mean something to me. It's still part of my body. But right now, the pain is my lung. That's where I need to focus on. As a Christian, any part of the body that is hurting, that is vulnerable, then we need to accept that. And if that part of the body wants to say, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and that might make you feel uncomfortable. But as Paul said, meet people where they are, be weak when they're weak. If that's where they are, then you say, yes, absolutely, Black Lives Matter. And how can I help you make sure that you know that I know that your life matters, right? So from a Christian perspective, we are commanded again to make sure that we love everyone. And if people in this part of the community feels like they feel like their lives don't matter, and by someone just saying Black Lives Matter, that gives them some empowerment, that should not threaten anyone else. That's not saying white lives don't matter, Latino lives don't matter. That's saying right now, this part of the body hurts and I'm hurting, and I need you to see my pain. And as a Christian, as someone who loves Jesus, Jesus would want you to see their pain and acknowledge their pain. And he actually commands you to love them and help them through that pain. So of course, Black Lives Matter. And of course that matters. But of course, white lives matters, Latino lives matter. But the Black lives right now, they're saying, hey, we're in a lot of pain. See me, feel me, hear me. And as Christians, that should be an easy ask for us, right? We're here to help the sick, the people who are most vulnerable. And right now, that part of the body is the one saying we need help. So I just wanted to address that when you said Black Lives Matter to people, because I thought that was powerful and needed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great word. So amen to that. Yeah. Henry, anything else that you would want to say that we didn't cover here that you would love to take a second to address?
Nope, just besides keep supporting the church. The church is needed more than ever, especially when the COVID-19, all this stuff shakes out. You're going to see a lot more people vulnerable. A lot of people more angry, emotionally and mentally worn down. And the church is going to have a bigger role to step in outside the church walls and to embrace people inside the church walls. So keep supporting the church in any way you can. Just because you can't show up on Sundays in the church, I actually think it's more relevant now. And you're probably reaching more people online, probably is my guess, than you were in the church. That's my guess. I don't know if that's true.
No, it is true. Yeah.
Yep. And so things are changing, but Jesus doesn't change. And so the church is still the church, and still invest in the church. And support John in this. This is a journey for him too, of going through this issues of race and how to balance that. Being a pastor and being a leader doesn't make him feel less vulnerable. And so support him still and give him the grace and the space to grow in this space, recognizing that he's hearing and seeing pain in the community, and he's trying to figure out a way to address that. And so support him, even if you disagree with some of it, something makes you uncomfortable. Recognize that these are growing pains that the church has to address, and give him the grace and the space and love to allow him to do that. So thank you, Harlan. I miss you guys.
Yeah, well, we miss you, man. And again, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Appreciate you taking the time to join us and to help us continue this conversation. So thank you, Henry.
Thank you, brother. Tell your better half I said hello.
Will do.